But now it should get everything.
Yeah.
Okay, hopefully it'll work with a few videos. All right, so this is all familiar territory, right? We don't need to rehash this, I hope, about the ways in which, even prior to the First World War, artists, philosophers, psychologists, and so on begin challenging that sense of objective truth that had been the dominant cultural value dating all the way back to scientific revolution and enlightenment, right? That sense of progress and optimism in human achievement goes away, and instead we get, Nietzsche, which is, kind of depressing until you pair it with family circus images, in which case it's charming. And if that comment makes no sense for the people listening after the fact, you had to be there. Okay. So the First World War really intensifies a lot of these transformations, I think in part because it is so destructive. I've just tried to pull a few images that capture the scale and maybe sort of overwhelmingness of destruction. So there's some art project that's gone back and colorized. These weren't originally in color, but they've gone back and colorized these photos. This is a 1917 photo from an event called the Battle of Passchendaele. Hopefully you get a sense of like, if you did the World War I poetry unit with Dr. Taylor, if you're in the British Lit class, right, this like wasteland narrative or, this just sense of desolation, destruction, right? Villages get totally bombed out. Landscapes, you see the barbed wire strewn everywhere. The trees are all stripped away. A lot of these photos, this one unfortunately features. This is a postcard. I don't know if you can tell what's going on here, but again, it also generates these landscapes and these visuals that are incomprehensible. Yeah, there's been a horse. There's a carcass of a horse that had gone charging across the battlefield, right? And a piece of ordnance exploded and has now catapulted the horse into the tree, and it is sitting up in the tree decomposing. Yeah, I don't think it's like the Pegasus without wings or something is how this translates. But the point is, it's generating, again, these images, these scenes that there's no reference point for. And so as artists and especially critics of the war begin to emerge, they try to find a way to have their art both really aggressively critique the cultural values that have led to this war, but also establish some new ones that might undo these conflicts in the future. So the first movement I want to talk about, the art movement I want to talk about, which is there on your list, so hopefully you can try if you have really small handwriting to take notes on those little points, or I encourage you to use a separate piece of paper. The choice is yours. Is called the Dada movement. Dada itself is supposed to be a nonsense word. The entire sort of premise of the Dada movement is to poke fun at and reveal the absurdity of standard conventions of what's considered beautiful or aesthetically pleasing or wonderful. Okay? And it finds its sort of origin point in 1916, so obviously we're in the war, right? Because fighting ends in 1918 and the war's over officially by treaty in 1919. But gets established in the midst of the war in Zurich, Switzerland, which is a perhaps natural place to have this beginning as a movement because Switzerland is a neutral country. So you have expatriates who have fled from Germany or France or Belgium, all sort of collaborating and joining together in Zurich and starting this art movement, which again is supposed to play up the absurdity of the traditional standards of beauty. So I'll give you a couple examples from the Dada movement. It always tends to be sort of entertaining and strange. And so as we look at a few of these examples, I want you to think about how they take what you might expect as like a standard presentation of art or a standard expectation of beauty with some features that are familiar, but then subvert those expectations, challenge those expectations of what counts as beautiful. So the first thing I'm going to share with you is a performance of a piece called Karawane by I believe German poet, artist named Hugo Ball. And it's a recording from of this performance. So I hope this will work. Let's see. I'm going to zoom ahead a little bit. So again, paying attention to how some of it feels familiar, but then there's also a lot of subversion of those expectations. All right. can follow along, look at the back of the outline. All right. Yeah, what's up with that? So what is familiar? Like, what are some things that kind of might register as like, okay, I get this, George?
Well, I kind of saw a relation between this music and Arnold Schoenberg.
Uh-huh.
How there's like a difference in notes, how it just suddenly changed from one note to another.
Okay.
And that's what he did, right, to portray like the depression.
Changing keys in the midst of, so that you have one sort of set of reference points as to where should notes go and what will sound pleasing together, and he keeps shifting the reference point as to what the key is. So yes, I'm not sure what that looks like transcribed out, or how you put a key signature on that, or if you put a key signature on that, but it's going to be a trick. Okay, good. That definite connection to Schoenberg, atonal music. None of this is on your workout mix. And if you're working on like galloping or something, it could be really set that pace you're working on. What else?
I saw there was kind of a drastic switch when the girls were dancing between like a pleasant, flowy like dance and then harsh movement like with their arms and stuff.
Okay.
And so I think there's like an odd contrast between the two.
Yeah, it's definitely that disjuncture. What else?
Shapes in the background are kind of like, what was the one's name with the children's book? Kind of like the absurd shapes that happened in the background.
Oh, the kukushka?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so just like the scenery and set, right? Part of what I hope you got is like, this has a lot of the standard things you'd expect in a performance, right? There is a scene, right? There are sets, there are music, there are performers, there are costumes, there's choreography. But this is an appropriate thing to talk about lip sync day, right? It seems really timely. But when you start looking at what they do with those things, like that music is not fun to listen to. Some of that dancing is kind of pleasant, but then gets weird. Some of those costumes kind of look familiar with like the flowing robes. And then there's the man, Hugo Ball. Second period couldn't decide, is he dressed up as a hot dog or a tube of toothpaste or a chef, a robot chef? I don't know exactly what he's going for, but the point is,
the expensive birthday party tin men were already sold out, so they had to get it really cheap.
this is pre-Wizard of Oz, so there's no... Looks like a marker.
A marker with
Crayola commercial.
Is that what? Crayola's really missing a marketing opportunity here, right? You came to love it through Caruana. Now, get the... I don't know. A silver marker. That would be a good name for a silver color, though. Caruana? I don't know. Something to think about. In any event, it puts you in a scenario where you're expecting one set of performances and then, of course, deluges the audience with all sorts of things that are unexpected and unpleasant and unintelligible, right? Like, what's going on in Caruana here? You can read the poem. What's this about? No? No? That's a different thing, George. Close, but not close at all, actually. It's a bunch of gibberish. Is there a point?
It's like
Like, this just doesn't make sense to anyone.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense to anyone. It's all gibberish, right?
But did it have to be, like, read like this? Like, did these words...
You saw him read it.
He had a script for his gibberish.
Yeah, yeah. But so again, there's like, normally you'd expect things that are published you want to capture so that they're repeatable and lots of people can read them and understand them, right? And here he's publishing it in, of course, part of it's like the wacky typeset. He keeps changing the font. But yeah, this is how the poem's published. But then also, and this is a really important part about language, yes, it is gibberish, but I also want to drive home the important point of how, because it's gibberish, it's in no language. And big factor, what's that? So it is sort of universal, or it certainly is anti-national, right? I'm not going to pick one language to prioritize or celebrate as the best type of literature, the best type of poetry, right? Where you can feel, think about the Romantic movement by contrast, where it's all about discovering the unique landscape and the unique language and the unique culture of that particular nation. This is the anti-national sort of reaction. Though, of course, it shares some of this like individual subjectivity and experience focus. And in so doing, right, critiques this huge force that drove the war, both its causes and the fighting, right? This idea that you're going to protect your nation, you're going to protect your people. But what if we don't have a language? What if poetry doesn't celebrate a unique feature of a certain group's past? Question.
Yeah, was this like a mockery of like cultural and traditional performance as well?
Yeah, exactly, right? So it's this, the underlying theme of a lot of the Dada movement especially is think about what Europeans consider to be high culture, right? Here are the greats of high culture. Now, if high culture has brought us the death and destruction and irrational fighting of the First World War, right, and horses blown up into trees, should we keep celebrating that high culture? Well, they certainly think no, right? And so the point is, let's critique it and lampoon it in a way to reveal how these features have been absurd and have led us in this decadent, destructive path. Does that make sense? Right? And the Dada movement is really good at doing this in ways that, are like really, I don't know, sassy might be not the right word. But here's Marcel Duchamp, another really prominent figure in the movement. Here's his entry into a non-juried art exhibition in 1917. This is his sculpture Fountain.
Yeah, that's
Look at your.
Oh, what? Second period was sort of, they were looking at this for a long time. Now, granted, my gender distribution there was 12 girls and 3 boys. And so but I imagine, not to say that
That's straight up.
that is straight up a urinal, yes. No, but is it though? Because he signed it.
Yeah.
And
That's,
what
what,
did they-
that's still what people do today. I mean, they still sign the urinals. Not gonna
Okay.
lie, not gonna
Yeah, but
lie.
that's just me. So all those signatures on urinals are yours, Justin. Okay, now you sort of revealed your.
I have seen.
So what's going on?
It's like a urinal, like with graffiti on it.
Yeah, but it's been like when he submitted this, he submitted it to be displayed on a pedestal. It was supposed to be. It was part of like an organization he was a part of. He was on the chair of this art competition that was supposed to be non-juried, right? But where there's not a group of sort of tastemakers who say this is beautiful, this is what should be in the official salon exhibition. It was supposed to be any entry was allowed. This is Duchamp, who was on the organization of this committee that he submitted this thing to. This was not allowed, and then he resigned in a huff, right? Because even a group where they're just supposed to accept anything would not put a urinal in their in their exhibition because they're like, this isn't art. He's like, well, why not? This is part of a series of what he called ready-mades. So basically, like, I recognize the aesthetic value of everyday objects, and I want to celebrate the artistic feature of that, right? Sort of like, oh no, but that's something you pee in, right? And
Why did they call it fountain?
well,
What's he gonna
I don't know. There's some. You do what you want with that one. What do you think? Yeah.
So, did he actually think that was art, or was it like a sarcastic spin on?
It's hard to know to get into it. It certainly is a critique of what counts as art.
He still does it.
No.
Okay.
Did he? Yeah, what?
No, he bought it from a plumbing supply shop and wrote.
Yeah.
I mean, he made this part.
Wait, so
He decided how to present it.
he bought it and just wrote his name.
Yeah.
Was it a urinal?
But of course, this raises all sorts of like, there are legal questions that go along with this in terms of like, but
It's
also,
not actually his if he didn't make it.
well, I don't know. Or is art just the concept, or does it have to be the physical production of something? Right? Like, is the presentation of this object in a different context with a signature?
But like when it was
Well, if
actually a
you
urinal.
take like,
That's a
why
really
is that
small
not
urinal.
easy? You're like, this is mine. It's not yours. If you didn't paint that.
Says the plumber.
Do you want to know about it?
Yeah, the plumber's got real territorial about this one. Here, let me show you. Let me show you another mark. Yeah.
Why is his arm not his name is Marcel Duchamp?
It'd be metaphorical.
Again, like, why not? Right? So again, it's highlighting the absurdity. Are you getting this theme of like the traditional standards of beauty and judgment of taste that have gone along with these juried exhibitions? he's trying to find ways to critique and attack and to provoke and challenge those traditional notions of what counts as art, what counts as beauty. Here's another one of his ready-mades.
Kind of looks like he just grew a mustache.
That's exactly what he did. He bought a postcard, he drew a mustache on her, and he wrote these initials LHOOQ, which is supposed to, I guess, be like LHOOQ or something. Anyway, if you look at the Wikipedia page on this piece, you will see that it's supposed to sound like the French expression for basically like, she has an attractive derriere. So that's roughly how it translates. He's like your first artistic troll, right?
Oh my god.
I don't know.
Right?
I like this.
You see, yeah. But you see, again, rejection of notions of standard beauty, right? Challenging optimism of what counts as like true art. Recognizing the individual subjective nature of what has traditionally been considered high culture or sophistication. And he's doing all of this through,
Where was this presented at?
I can't remember where he published or displayed this particular
It was
piece.
displayed.
I don't think so. I think,
Like taped it to his urinal.
It came
That's
along.
what I wondered. Were they like next to each other? Was it like urinal?
It's a good question.
Mustache, totally set?
That's a good, the Wikipedia page will know all of this. But you're seeing the connections to the themes here. All right. So Dadaism is our first movement, again, emerging, and I mentioned it first because it starts in the midst of the First World War to sort of highlight, critique, attack the cultural values and sort of decadent bourgeois sense of sophistication that those artists felt had brought Europe into this destructive, pointless conflict. Once the Dada movement and the war ends and the Dada movement starts to dissolve, a lot of its members move over into surrealism, which you're maybe slightly more familiar with. Yes, Salvador Dali, who's one of the most prominent amongst them. The surrealist movement I bring up because it is deeply influenced by Freud, who, of course, I know you've been thinking all about Little Hands and that white horse with the black lips. The standard, hopefully haunting your dreams too, just as it haunted Little Hands' dreams. In any event, these artists in the surrealist movement try to explore through art, through visual representation, the human subconscious. How can we, get at and have people grapple with dreams and what their mind is not intentionally thinking about? And there's two sort of main schools of thought. This is an example of what's called naturalistic surrealism, where the artist provides all sorts of images that have some reference point that are somewhat recognizable, but distorts and twists them and presents them in sort of confusing ways that are, in looking at them, revealing about what the viewer thinks, right? What the viewer's inner subconscious might express. Does that make sense? So as you look at this, I don't know what you see or make of it. Yeah, sure. There's a lot going on. Okay, we got a ladder.
It doesn't have any like rungs on the bottom.
Well, that makes it hard to use. Yeah, and that's true.
There's a fish on the
Hard
table.
looking person.
There's a what?
A little like
Yeah, that looks like King
red
Julian.
and half.
Oh, down here?
Blue. No,
That-
half
one that
red,
you
half
point-
blue with the big
Bottom.
long neck.
Bottom
Yeah,
of
no, the one you just pointed at.
Oh yeah, this, yeah.
It looks like a little guitar.
The guy that you pointed
Okay.
at, the guy that you pointed to at the beginning was like King Julian.
Okay, sure. I don't think that Joan Miro in 1924 is particularly familiar with the Madagascar series, but you never know.
There's an ocean
There's
in
like
the
a little
table.
mermaid in the corner.
Okay, mermaid.
Is
All
that-
my classes have seen mermaids here, so that's very telling
Is
about
that
your
a
subconscious.
kangaroo down there?
I don't know. Or is it a little kitty cat? I don't know. Anyway,
It looks like a
There's
king.
a little
Yeah.
but the point is, right, all of this is open to interpretation, quite flexible in terms of its significance. You're probably most familiar, right? You've seen Dali's, I'm not going to actually put play on this, but this is a very traditional or very prominent form of naturalistic surrealism, right? Let's take these clocks and melt them and hang them over tree branches. Again, it's this weird mixing of objects that are familiar in one context, presented in strange ways, or put in circumstances and settings that have no logic or reason to them, right? In ways that may allow the viewer to, in trying to make meaning of it, explore their own subconscious. Cool. All right. So that's surrealism. The real focus I want to move to, though, here today is thinking about the rebuilding process and how how architecture is a real, has a real opportunity, or many architects see a real opportunity for themselves after the First World War. You may observe correctly, this is a pre-World War I building. And I share this with you just as a reminder of the old styles of building that were highly ornamented, highly decorated, the sort of traditional culture of what was considered beautiful that these post-war Age of Anxiety architects will critique and attack. So we talked about Adolf Loos yesterday, or rather you saw in the video yesterday in the Loos house, right, contrasted with the Habsburg Palace with all the fancy decorations and so on. Here's yet another example of pre-war decadent architecture. This one coming from a different style. That thing you saw in the Austrian example was maybe more Baroque art or Baroque revival architecture. This is what's called Art Nouveau. Has anyone seen Art Nouveau architecture? If you've been to Paris and never gone into the subway stops, there's those Hector Guimard entryways that say Metropolitan on them and like big swervy cribbling ear things. Same style, Art Nouveau. The dominant aesthetic of Art Nouveau, again, highly decorated, really fancy, is about like organic forms. So you sort of see the vines in the wallpaper here. This is all custom made, custom painted, one-of-a-kind wallpaper. That theme gets echoed in the tile work, right? That theme is echoed in the brass railings and in the pillar that provides support for the stairs, and in the light fixture, and in the stained glass, and in the mirror, right? It is this overwhelming, the Germans have a great word for this. I think I should have it up here. No, I don't. This house is a Gesamtkunstwerk. Gesamtkunstwerk, yeah? 9? This means total work of art. Total work of art. Pretty straightforward translation. Kunst is art, Gesamt is total. Okay. Again, beautiful, ornate, lavish, extremely expensive, right? Really only accessible for the upper bourgeoisie, and the sort of stuff that Age of Anxiety architects hate. Right? Because you're celebrating all of this lavish excess that they felt was the foundational cause of the war.
So the Art Nouveau movement was against the Age of Anxiety.
Or rather, reverse that, right? Because it's coming before. So the Age of Anxiety looks back at things like the Art Nouveau and says, this is exactly the type of lavish expense and, sort of overwhelming obsession with style that is what made Europe blow itself up. Because every nation felt its own style was the best, right? And had to compete through this sort of excessive acquisition of goods and, material wealth, things of that nature. Does that make sense? So this is like the counterexample, right? So this, I hope you will see, contrasts starkly with the proposals from a series of architects. So the next three folks we're going to deal with, it already gets critiqued by Adolf Loos before the war, right? So here's a different commission from Adolf Loos. This is a private home in Vienna. Hopefully you recognize, hey, it's another house without eyebrows. I don't know, that was a weird expression. It's a weird expression. Different one, perhaps, but, maybe not. After commissioning fields off of Guardsmen, it was important that they built a house 100 years before in Vienna. Chronology. Eventually we'll get to thinking about, how things go, actually, in time. But, so...
Wait, so did some people, because they talked a lot about its criticism, but some people did, actually enjoy it, right?
Some people did actually enjoy it, yeah. And he will gain this... Adolf Loos is sort of a, like a vanguard figure. Do you know what I mean by that? He's leading the charge. And is willing to fight these standard conventions of beauty well before they become very popular. It becomes popular to do so. But after the war, a school of architects emerges, of whom the next, I guess the next three sections are all that are characterized as the international style. The international style. So that's what I want to focus on now, is the international style. Perhaps foremost among them, and that name is not insignificant. Sorry to use a double negative. I'll say it the other way. That name is significant. International style. Pourquoi? Or French.
Because like in the Art Nouveau movement, we talked about how every nation thought that their art was the best, and so I think that like international architecture would say that like we can all have the same architecture, and then we don't have to fight for power.
Exactly, right. And so again, this is a profoundly and in contrast to some of this age of anxiety stuff, this is a more optimistic spin. The idea that in rebuilding Europe, thinking about those devastated landscapes, right, there's a big opportunity to rebuild, reconstruct. We can embrace an architecture and create a new built environment that will be shared between nations and thereby minimize the differences in perceived, which nation is better than another, and as a result, stop future conflict. Does that make sense? Right. It's pretty idealistic. Right? This is more of like the Wilsonian vision. How do I create some organization where everyone gets together and chit-chats about like how to drop the Balkans, and then no war happens. Same thing. How do we make sweet new buildings out of, and here's also a different application, of industrial materials? How do we take the methods and scale of industrial manufacturing and use that to create, Corbusier wrote sort of a treatise called Toward a New Architecture. How do we create a new architecture that will reshape human society in the process of building and will embrace the sort of power of the machine age, and as a result use the materials, the big things that are important for our international style builders are steel, concrete, glass, right? Those core industrial production features will become the literal building blocks of all architecture, idealistically, and it will be embraced internationally and thereby build a new sort of peaceful era. Pretty upbeat. Okay. The other idea of it, and here's where we get back to some of our themes of the age of anxiety, is that those types of building materials don't have one end result or form that they have to fit into, right? If you reject all the old style building like wood frame and bricks and the more traditional leaded glass windows that you might have in a home and embrace these new methods, the architectural language of the past will go away. But also, it can be infinitely modified depending on the particular need of the people who live in a house. So Corbusier was really sort of had these ambitious visions that all his homes should have common features, but that each home would be different because you're using building materials that don't have to fit into a certain end form. Does that make sense? It's like if you buy a random box of Legos rather than a set of Legos that has to go through the thing. Right? So this is I'm trying to reach on your own terms, but Legos are Swedish. He's French, not to make nationalism the central thing again. Anyway, so in this particular context, right, some of the things Corbusier thought should be in all homes, but that would still make them variable, is that they should all be elevated off the ground floor, and that the ground level should be open, which would allow you to park your new vehicle underneath. Okay, so you're, again, embracing technology of the machine age. We're driving automobiles now, so the cars can all go underneath the house. Even in his sketch here, Maison Citroën, which is the reference to the vehicle manufacturer Citroën. Oui? No. Okay. Anyway, there's a French car company called Citroën. And, this is designed to, you can put your Citroën under there. So, vehicle can go underneath. You have, because it's made of these simple materials, the ability to make the facade look whatever way you want it to. If you want to put a balcony there, if you want to put a railing there, put the windows at this height, make them run the entire length of the facade, you can, because there's no actual building supportive purpose that the wall plays, the exterior wall plays. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So again, infinitely variable depending on individual circumstances.
So they had windows at this point, yes.
In 1922, windows did exist. Yes, this is a... Was that a genuine question?
No, it was a question.
And we've seen
Patrick
it was a,
Patrick asked that question.
Patrick
On one
was
of the
the
multiple choice.
oh, I don't remember that.
Well,
It's a real Throwback Thursday moment here.
He was like, we know it's like 1900s because there's windows.
Oh,
Nice job.
we could also think back to all the, all that Dutch art. Like you think about like Van Eyck. Everything
it was
is.
It was like one of the.
Oh yeah, sure. But everyone, every single painting Van Eyck does is like light coming in through, window on the left to, like milkmaid, preparing, bowl of fruit or something, whatever. I guess the fruit maid should take care of the fruit. Sorry, there's clearly distinctions between what type of maid deals with what items in the kitchen. Okay, again, the interior of the building, same thing. It doesn't matter where you put the walls because the walls don't actually provide any supporting purpose, and all the buildings can incorporate nature by having this open roof garden. All right, so you're sort of seeing how the individual subjective experience or needs of a family could be met through this new architecture, which is infinitely varied, but made through these same simple materials. And about some others of these commissions in the 1920s, there's a very dramatic one. Yeah, it's pretty swanky. Right, and they're really striking. And this language has, maybe it's less striking now than, say, Caruana, where it's like, that's not going to have any commercial appeal, whereas this has been embraced more widely into, contemporary building, and so you can see this stuff kicking around. Sort of has reference point. But in the 1920s, in the 1930s, this is really striking. The international style is also embraced in the losing power, right, in Germany, who has had to sign the war guilt clause and accept responsibility. The new government that takes over after Wilhelm II, the Weimar Republic, which we'll talk about when we come back from the break, really does its darndest to rebuild Germany in a democratic, supportive, non-militaristic way, and provide support for all sorts of innovative things. We'll talk when we come back from the break about their methods in dealing with disabled veterans, which I think is a really interesting case study. But they also provide support for schools of art that embrace this international style in an attempt to establish a new aesthetic, a new way of making furniture, of doing paintings, of building buildings that would break from the past. The group in Germany that's focused on this is called the Bauhaus, founded by this fellow, Walter Gropius. And it's operational from the entire year, during the years of the Weimar Republic's operation, right? Why does it go away in 1933? Well, ask Nazis what they think about international cooperation, okay? So anything that is vaguely international, or, why does German participation in the League of Nations end in 1933? Check with the Nazi, okay? The answer is that, what's that? Don't actually check with the Nazi. No, I'm sure that there's parts of Reddit where you can ask them, why did you leave in 1933? And they're like, oh, I'll tell you. r/white nationalism, right? Don't, that's mind the gap between what I say and what you hear. Now, this is all recorded, so let me go on the record to say, don't go make friends with Nazis. That was a rhetorical move. I don't actually recommend that. Okay, all right. Am I clear on that?
That sounds like the headline of
Question?
Yeah. So I guess this is probably a better question for later, but the Nazis participated in the Olympics and things like that.
Mm-hmm. They host the 1936 Olympics in Berlin.
So was that purely for the sake of showing off nationalism?
Yeah, but the Olympics aren't. They are theoretically. They're founded. The Olympics are an interesting case study. I've seen questions on the AP exam about them before.
Yeah,
I don't know what his name is. He was black.
Jim Brown? Jesse Owens.
Yeah, Jesse Owens.
Okay.
There was this whole thing in Germany where they didn't want Jesse Owens to compete because he was black. I don't know.
Yeah, that tracks with Nazis. But again, the Olympics in general, the modern Olympics, were revived in 1896 as a way. So I've seen questions about this. So 1896. Think about where we are chronologically, right? And the entire goal was to find a venue for competition among nations where they can prove who's the best, but not kill each other. Right? That's the origin of modern Olympics, right? If we think about rampant nationalism in the late 19th century, here's a venue, make people run fast and turn left, and then you'll know you're the best.
So is Norway the best then?
Yeah.
Well, when it came to Nordic skiing. Now, I don't know if Norway had its independence in that year, if it was still attached to the Kingdom of Sweden. I think it may still have been part of the Kingdom of Sweden. You should go ask Mr. Davenport. He traveled to Norway over the February break, and there is all sorts, in the Norwegian History Museum, there was some so much shade thrown at the Swedes and at the British people. Oh my gosh, it was amazing. There was some he sent me this great picture of an exhibit where they're about Norwegian explorers going to the South Pole, and how Roald Amundsen, who is this British guy and gets all the
Yeah.
credit for discovering the South Pole, is actually like a monster and slandered the Norwegians, and the Norwegians are actually the ones who made the break there first. And a big part of the fight involved how well did the Norwegians treat their dogs in getting there. And they're like, in contrast, this photo shows you the dogs are healthy and well fed, and in trying the British dogs are dead, right? So anyway, it's this whole like nationalism fight thing is no joke, right? When it gets to is like, who's discovering the South Pole? Like, how did they treat their dogs? And whether the dogs are healthy and lustrous enough proves whether you're a good nation or a bad nation. If you're not clear on how messed up nationalism is yet, I present that exhibit to you. Okay, anyway, back to the Bauhaus. Gropius is busy working with other architects. Mies van der Rohe is a really famous one. Ends up migrating to the United States in the 50s and building a number of sort of modern skyscraper architecture, I think. If you've ever seen like really tall black, glass building with black steel reinforcements that is very plain, which you probably have, that language is really drawn from Mies van der Rohe. But again, you can see this is a competition. He doesn't actually build these structures, but he is clearly trying to cite this new style of architecture, glass, concrete, and steel, within the setting of other older building styles in a way that will sort of totally redraw what you expect out of a building, right? Will look nothing like the past. Break from the past, don't recreate the things and cultural features that had driven this conflict forward. Does that make sense? Right? And the Bauhaus building itself, and the interior, both interior and exterior illustrate this. This is a picture of Gropius, so the founder, his office.
These are some swanky buildings.
Yeah, well, it's a Gesamtkunstwerk of its own, but again, in a totally different language. Do you see like the total break from the Art Nouveau? Right, it's not trying to create the style. It's like everything is right lines. Everything is primary colors, right? Everything is cubic forms, simple, austere, spare. They can be shared across, right? Sort of like geometry, math, universal language can be shared across all sorts of different nations. The building shares this aesthetic, obviously, right? Big, wide open glass wall that reveals the concrete supports and those structures. Big cubic forms.
I thought that was a reflection.
No, that's the interior, right? So you can sort of see into these spaces and recognize that this is not looking like what you've seen before, right? Breaking from the past. Just different views of the building. The building was broken out into the sort of different specialties. There was like the painting wing and the like material production wing, like furniture and stuff, and the architecture drafting wing. So again, it was supposed to. The spaces of the design school itself were supposed to inspire and help shape this new international style. Lastly, try to wrap up real quickly just talking about the Soviet Union, which we have obviously talked about when we dealt with the Bolshevik Revolution. I'm seeing some nods because I think Joel showed this image to you last year, but in a different context.
Yeah, it was like showing us because of the 1984. In those 84, it had like a real version.
Oh, okay.
It described the version of that being successful in the country that he was.
Okay. So, whatever, Airstrip 1 or something has a Tatlin-inspired houses of government. So, obviously, the Bolshevik Revolution, at the end of the Russian Civil War, successfully breaks the Soviet Union away from the past and provides the leaders of the Communist Party with this opportunity to reshape the state in a modern, new sort of communist vision. Right? The problem is that the Soviet Union, Russia in particular, is still basically a big agricultural area with lots of peasants. So the challenge for the now dominant Communist Party, the Bolsheviks, is that they have to find a way to instill some of the values and ideologies of communism amongst a population that is still largely illiterate and rural and agricultural, right? So one of the ways that the Communist Party starts to do this early in its, actually during this Russian Civil War, right, 1919, 1920, the Bolsheviks are still fighting the White Army, is they start putting forth proposals for showing what will our new government look like? How will we rebuild? So they held this competition to create this monument that would also serve as the houses of government. And it was supposed to be an entire break from anything representative of the Russian past, right? This is a language, an architectural language for the proletariat. It also is an architectural language that's supposed to echo Marx's ideology. So if you look at the sort of structure of this building, see like this double helix thing, coming to a unified point at the top, is that evident? Then what Totley was trying to capture here is the notion of a Marxist dialectic, right? We talked about the dialectic in class, the struggle between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, as this ongoing process that eventually culminates in the overthrow, the successful revolution, right, that yielded Bolshevik control in Russia. And so that this monument would be the visual embodiment of Marxist dialectical material ideology, and also create a space for houses of government, but that would not represent old Russia, right? The different houses of government were all like these cubic forms that were supposed to like revolve or rotate at the relative rate of their importance. I can't remember exactly the speed. Seems like you'd get dizzy. Anyway, this is the one that spins like a top. It's like one of those amusement park rides where it spins really fast and you get stuck against the wall. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, it's like, I can't do any work. I'm in some sort of like spinning machine. Anyway, the language here, right, the visual language is, again, modern building materials, celebrating industrialization and labor productivity for workers, again, the proletariat, and trying to create visual representations of Marxist ideology. Okay? So hopefully you can see how those themes about the age of anxiety are evident in all of these varied examples. And now I have to figure out how to stop my QuickTime player. How do I do this, Lucas?
Up in the top, up in your toolbar up there, there's a little.
Aha!